Please welcome Amy Hennig.
Temple of Doom.
Hi, guys.
That's a good first one.
Yeah, Temple of Doom.
Thank you for joining us today. It's really good to see all of you. I've had the privilege of working alongside and getting to know the folks at Lucasfilm and ILMxLAB for a few years now. And I can tell you from personal experience, they are a talented bunch. What makes ILMxLAB unique is not just the fact that they come from so many different backgrounds and they have this sort of diversity of experience, and they have so many diverse creative partnerships, but fundamentally it is their commitment to the idea of immersive entertainment as storytelling and the medium as a storytelling medium, a topic which is, of course, very, very close to my heart. So without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage Mohen Leo, Director of Content and Platform Strategy at ILMxLAB. Mark Miller, Executive Creative Producer.
Hey.
And finally, Matt Martin, Creative Executive in the Lucasfilm Story Group. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Welcome, guys.
He's famous. I know.
All right, here we go. So like I was just saying, you guys actually come from very different backgrounds, and the people and the team inside of ILMxLAB does as well. So Mohen and Mark, you've been working in the visual effects industry for over 20 years and over 30 years. They've worked on all of your favorite films. And Matt, you've been loving Star Wars since you were a child, and you actually sort of parlayed that into the dream career of...
Somehow made that a job.
Yeah, exactly. Working that into being your career. So we're actually celebrating the 3rd year anniversary of ILMxLAB's founding this week. So yes, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about how ILMxLAB started as a collaborative endeavor fundamentally, right? And how you feel the diversity of your experience, the diversity of the team, and all of your creative partnerships elevates the work.
You know, I think when we first envisioned this thing and started it 3 years ago, it was very much meant to be a combination of a lot of different groups of people that we dragged in, like Mohen, eventually from ILM, and a bunch of artists there, of the Skywalker sound people who are so important, especially in the VR and AR space in the storytelling. And then the Lucasfilm Story Group, which Matt's a part of, and Kiri Hart runs, and because we wanted to do things that were authentic stories in the Star Wars universe, and wherever we went, we wanted the support of that group because they're so great at what they do. And then it kind of snowballed into partnerships with the people at Epic Games and the Disney tech groups that support us and the different actors that we've pulled out of the Star Wars universe and stories. So all that, and then we added in a bunch of people that we recruited from the real-time world to come in, game designers and artists from that world, and we threw everybody together, and there's a lot of different languages being spoken there. There's a lot of different systems of how people do their jobs and what they're used to, the production entities that they're used to having. But what it ended up being was a really great stew, and I think it's caused some near fist fights and some complaining, but it's also been this amazing creative back and forth.
And I think that's actually what makes it kind of unusual in the industry, from my experience, is that you do have people from all these different backgrounds, creative backgrounds. And obviously you've been working in games now in your role in the story group for a while.
Yeah, working in games was sort of my first step into anything interactive. I mean, obviously I enjoyed interactive stuff before that, but it was the first time actually working, and then kind of getting pulled in to help out with the ILMxLAB stuff has been a whole other level, because the challenges in that are so completely different than what you would expect in a video game.
Well, and that's what's interesting too. I mean, the fact that you have games people and movie people, and you all originally sort of, with your work with Lucasfilm and ILM, come from what I would call kind of a pre-rendered background, for lack of a better word. Basically, you have a viewer. It's a passive experience, right? In games, and in any sort of real-time medium, you have a player. And even more so, ideally, you have an interactive collaborator in the story. So what has that been like to make that transition?
I mean, I think it's an interesting challenge, certainly, and one that the whole industry is still sort of trying to figure out what is the right language for that. And I don't think there is a single right answer for what storytelling in VR is. You know, VR is a medium, like there's not a single answer for what storytelling in television is. There's many answers. I think for us, the focus has always been trying to give authentic cinematic experiences, like making people feel like they can get on the other side of that screen. You know, people have grown up with cinema, with these stories, with these worlds, and always fantasized about what it would be like to be in that world. And so I feel like we're now suddenly have technology that allows people to get on the other side of that screen. And what we want to make sure is that the stories that we tell feel authentic, like you imagined them.
Right, right. And so again, that kind of goes back to that unique blend of skills and the kind of the creative collision of all those things coming together and the chaos and the dynamism that sort of results, right? Yeah. And so you guys have worked some in what I would call consumer VR, home VR. A couple of more recent titles are Trials on Tatooine and the Droid Repair Bay, I know, and other things that you're working on now that we cannot talk about. Yeah. But where do you see the evolution of consumer VR as a platform? Because obviously, you know, the hardware is improving, the market's improving. I think it's going to be something that's much more commonplace. So where do you think that's going? And how does like augmented reality and sort of mixed reality fit into that?
I mean, I think definitely we all believe that this industry will continue to grow. And I think we sort of collectively, even in the industry, I think there's sort of an idea of what VR can be in the future as all of this technology matures, and we're sort of trying to take just little steps towards that. You know, I think one of the big transitions for people coming from a film background is that you're very much used to having control over everything in the storytelling. You have control over the camera and the cut and like every part of it. And in making not only interactive media, but in particular virtual reality, you have to give up a lot of that control in a way. And
I want to dig into that more.
Yeah, no, you have to sort of like open your hand a little bit. But I think where all of this hopefully will get to in the end is that we have the technology to more like create worlds in which stories can happen, rather than necessarily like just driving a single linear narrative.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And I think as far as the evolution, I think as this next generation of tetherless headsets comes out and hopefully gets adopted, everyone tell your friends, go buy one. But and we can start telling bigger, longer stories to people, and the fatigue factor and some of the barriers to entry on the price side go away. I think it's going to really expand the audience to be able to tell all different kinds of stories that people want. So
yeah, I don't know if I'm being too hopeful as somebody who's excited both as a consumer of and a maker of interactive stories. Right. I'm like so excited by VR right now, in all forms. And so I sort of have to believe that with all these advances, and like you said, tetherless headsets, it's going to become eventually as ubiquitous as our phones in our pockets, I think. And so it kind of feels very much like the early days of film, where we're like just pointing a camera at the train coming to the station, you know, or you know. And kind of for me, that's where the excitement of it comes from, the idea that there's not a lot of rules written yet. And you know, how do you guys feel about that?
I think you're absolutely right, and I think in a way that has to naturally evolve. If you take film as an example, I think that you know, film when it started out, it was either pointing it at a train going to the station, or early films were just pointing a camera at a stage play because that's what people understood.
Exactly.
And I think it took time not just for the creators but also for the audiences to understand what a new medium is. And I think in the case of film, you almost needed a generation that grew up with film as a medium to become creators for the medium to mature. And so I think VR may well take like many years to find its find its language.
It's exciting to be part of that, right?
Yeah.
To feel like you get to be the Sergei Eisenstein and the Lumiere brothers of VR, right?
Well, it's a big challenge right now because we have to try to be in the middle somewhere, because we have we have to tell stories that people who get in a high-end headset for the first time can get into and can realize, and you have to take into account that they're going to be doing that first time high-end VR thing where they're like, oh my God, it's like a chair. It looks so much like a chair, and
they'll get over that eventually, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, people who are into it and have done a bunch are like, okay, what am I doing? Where am I going? What's the next thing?
Right.
And so you have to tell stories that and
for
come
both.
up with come up with mechanics that that people can play fast, or people can linger and watch what they want to and experience at their own rate, and kind of take in stuff at wherever they are on that continuum.
Something I've noticed too, the spectrum of experience. Like some people are so jaded. I will call myself one of those. I just go in and start picking things apart.
Yeah.
And other people are like, they're there, right?
Yeah.
And so whenever we focus test something, it's shocking to see the range of reactions. You're like, oh, I had no idea somebody was going to hit the floor.
Yeah.
It's like people jumping out of the way of the train coming to the station back in the day, right?
It's funny because it's like you're going to, what we've had with phones now, where there's now a generation of kids that are growing up and they've never experienced life without a phone in their pocket. We could get to a point where those kids are feeling the same way about VR, and then we're going to have to accommodate, the older folks that didn't have it when they grew up, and the kids that literally were born with, a headset on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
Is that possible?
Sure.
Well, maybe. Well, hopefully not. That would have
hurt. Now, the other side of what you guys have been working on, I'm sure people are familiar with as well, is kind of the rise of, I guess, what I would call location-based entertainment in VR and immersive installations. So a couple of the more well-known ones that you guys have worked on recently, first of all, would be like Star Wars Secret of the Empire in collaboration with The Void. And if any of you have not experienced this, you should go down to the Glendale Galleria or
Downtown Disney
and try it out, because it is mind-blowing. How would you describe the experience of that in The Void?
I just think that was the perfect platform for us at the perfect time. We were experimenting with a lot of things. We had seen The Void kind of coming along with their technology and been really interested in it. And then when that collaboration happened, it was perfect for us. It gave us a really a box to work in, a stage that's defined, and a storytelling medium that gives you a group, and where you really wanted a world you could step inside and know quickly. I mean, the great thing about Star Wars is that for 99% of the people out there, we can throw you down at a place in the world at a different time in a different era, and within a few seconds people go, oh, okay, I'm a rebel, there's a stormtrooper, I know what to do. There's not a lot of backstory you have to feed people to go like, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys. People get it.
Yeah.
And
I don't know how familiar you guys are with The Void, or whether you've seen it or heard it, but it's like you go in with a group of friends,
right,
and you wear the backpack and it's all untethered, and you have the headset. Everything is, what you're seeing through the headset is touchable and feelable and smellable, and it's, a friend of mine described VR, the goal of VR is not suspension of disbelief, it's absence of disbelief. And I would say that's kind of what The Void strives for. We're so used to in consumer VR that, you reach out and touch something, of course it's not there.
Right.
And then when your hand actually closes on a thing, you kind of go, holy crap.
And you're actually walking through a physical space.
Yes.
You're not
There's no
teleporting through,
teleporting,
you're physically walking from one place to another.
Yeah.
The best compliment that I've heard multiple times about that project is, I felt like I was in Star Wars. This is the first time I've ever stepped into Star Wars, and that's how I felt the first time I did it too. It's like, whoa, this is, I'm here. Yeah,
it really jacks right into your brain in a good way.
And I think it is really powerful, because, in a way, I feel like you have a glimpse of what VR hopefully will be in the future, sort of even more like at home and stuff, is that level of abstraction goes away, where at the moment when you're doing VR at home, there's still sort of this idea of like, okay, well, if I want to go over there, then I'm going to press this button, or if I want to pick this up, I'm going to do this with my controller. If you do location-based VR, from the moment you step into that world, you can interact with it instinctively, the way you interact with the real world. If there's something you need to pick up, you pick it up. If there's a wall, you can touch it. And I think what that does is it really shows us the power of VR. Like I remember the first time I did one of the Void experiences, that was before we did ours. I walked out and I had a vivid memory of the virtual space, and then I walked then through the real space, which they normally don't
Which
show.
they shouldn't let you do.
They normally don't show the audience because it's sort of peeking behind the curtain. Yeah. And my brain just went like, no, this isn't the part that matters. The part that matters is the memory of the fake place.
That was the real experience. Yeah. No, for sure. And of course, what location-based or installation-based VR allows for, too, is also just very moving experiences that aren't just sort of visceral and entertaining, but emotional. And so you guys were key collaborators on Alejandro Inarritu's Carne Arena, which I'm sure people have heard of. It's at the LACMA. I have not been able to do it myself because it's impossible to get tickets. But you know, it's just that's the other side of all of this is, you know, people come out of these experiences like just emotionally, like, I mean, people have come out of these things in tears and changed, right? There's great power.
Yeah, it started to show you when you put a great filmmaker with a vision of something that he really wanted to tell, a story about this group of people trying to cross the border into California and getting caught and what that meant to them all. And he grounded it all in reality of literally using real people who had crossed as mocap actors and telling their real stories. When you go through it, it definitely hits home. And the VR part of it is definitely transportive. You never start to think about where you are or what's going on or what kind of stage you're on. You're there with that group and you're experiencing it.
Yeah. And it's a really interesting example of creative that immediately got that he has to work differently in VR because it's basically when you're walking among this group of people in the VR experience, there's way too many people than you could ever like pay attention to at a time, right? So it's a large group of people that are having conversations, that are doing things, and you as an audience member have the choice of going like, oh, I'm going to walk over here and see what these people are doing or what these people are doing. On the one hand, it means that the creator, unlike in a film where you can go like close up on this thing, has to basically like allow the audience to find their own way. But the other thing that's really interesting about it is that because of that, each person that goes through it actually experiences a different story based on how they acted.
Right, and that's why I was saying your player, your guest, whatever word we want to use. We're running out of appropriate words now. That's everything evolves. They are your collaborator, right? Yep. And you have to make sure that you're giving them the agency to experience it the way they're moved to, right? Yeah. But it is, it's. I mean, I was trying to say, you know, it's so powerful, but again, with such power comes great responsibility, right, for us to, like, if we're jacking into people's brains, we want to do it responsibly as well. But in early days, people used to talk about VR as an empathy machine, which seemed a little, you know, it got a little overused, but that's a great example of exactly why that's true. There's the separation between you and the experience just melts away and allows us to experience things we would otherwise not, again, which is why I find VR so exciting. So I'm just looking at the clock. We don't have a lot of time left, but with the time we do, I'd like to deep dive a little bit more on storytelling. Sure. An 8-minute deep dive. So as storytellers, since this is what the panel is about, VR comes with huge potential and exciting opportunities and huge challenges. And we've touched on a couple of those, but all of our traditional means of storytelling through cinema, most of them get sort of stripped away. So where do you see like the biggest opportunities, and also what are the biggest challenges you guys are struggling with?
I think we're having a lot of conversations about how to represent you. I think with just a couple tracking points now in the home systems, and even in the location base, it's really hard to get full body tracking and make you believe it's really you and have one-to-one movement. And with the lack of ability right now, hopefully in a few years you'll be able to talk to characters and have them talk back to you. But right now, that's not sufficient. So it's really helping us establish. We do a lot of thinking about who you are and how you can feel like somebody and a character in that world, and not just an observer or playing a part.
So, because I think you want audiences to become part of the story, but you want to give them enough room to project themselves into it. Because I think one of the challenges is that we obviously want to give you a story context of who you are, but if I enter a VR experience and the first thing is somebody says, "You're a 14-year-old girl," part of my brain goes like, "No, I'm not."
Oh, come on, Mohen.
So
Inside.
Admit it.
so trying to strike that balance of like understanding who you're meant to be in the context of the story, but still allowing you to bring yourself into that is sort of a really difficult one.
I mean, as someone who has built a career on chatty third-person protagonists, the idea of first person and not imposing that kind of disconnect on the player or the user is like interesting. Narrative challenge to me, right? Like, how do you give them enough to role play, but not so much that they're like, okay, I'm just like, in a backpack riding behind this seeing this person's eyes, it's like, so, and I've been playing a bunch of stuff, and like some things work and some things don't. It's just kind of interesting to hear what you guys have learned about that.
What's nice about the medium is that I think just by the nature of it being you seeing out your eyes, potentially seeing your hands or whatever, you're automatically already bought into being the character. So you only need some kind of contextual clues to give you an idea of who you are in this world. And then you kind of bring the rest with you naturally, which is exciting, I think, as a storyteller.
Yeah. And I think that's true, because if we leave enough room there, then you can decide whether you're timid or bold in the context of that scene. You can still bring your own sensibilities into that.
A friend of mine, and actually fairly critiquing some stuff in our Uncharted, said that like when we would pull it off, it felt like you were an actor in a film and you were playing the role brilliantly. But if when we did it poorly, it felt like if you stepped out of line, the director was yelling, "Cut!" and like going, "Nope, that's not the right way to be," right? And we can't do that. It's that much worse in VR, right? And so it's just like, I want somebody to just codify the whole thing for me so I don't have to do all this thinking about it. But it's a whole different medium.
There's going to be, what's going to be nice is as the different tech permeates out there and AR starts coming up too, there's going to be all kinds of different ways that we're all going to be experimenting with how the hell you tell a story in an AR headset and keep any cohesiveness to us, or it'll be totally different than what we think it is. So that's part of the fun.
Yeah. Well, I want to leave a little time for questions, but I'm just going to ask one more of my own. You did say earlier that like one of ILMxLAB's goals is to basically create worlds where stories can happen, right? And we keep talking about collaboration. How are we empowering our players to basically collaborate with us in real time and tell the story with us? We don't want to leave a blank slate. But we want them to be able to be authors of a story that we're framing for them. I don't know if you want to kind of dig into that a little bit.
Yeah,
like what that means to you.
I think there's two parts to that. I think one of the things is that in order for that to work in the long run, you can't rely on like authored, scripted things to sustain that much content. I think if you really want to have people have hours and hours that they can spend in a world, you can't have somebody behind the scenes write every line of dialogue for everything, right? So I think it's going to be a combination of like social experiences, which I think is important. You see that with stuff like The Void. A lot of the stories that come out of that are what people did, together and to each other while they were in there, and that actually forms a big part of their experience. And that's something that's great for us because we didn't have to write that part. That's basically the thing that the audience brings to that. But then beyond that, I think there need to be advances in both things like procedural world building that makes it easier to build like large worlds, expandable worlds, character AI, so that you have characters that can believably respond to players without having to have like a big decision tree that you planned every possible outcome of. So it's going to be a long time before that's perfect.
Yeah. Any thoughts from you guys on that? Or?
I bet you have some thoughts on that.
I probably do, but I don't know if I should share them and break every NDA I've signed in the last couple of months.
I do think that's kind of the most exciting challenge, is still just sort of figuring out how to do that and what things to, hint at the players and what things to straight up tell the players and what things to just leave there to let them discover completely.
Yeah. No, it's exciting. Well, I've almost used all our time because I'm greedy that way. Do you guys have any questions? Yes. Oh, sorry.
Nicole Lazaro from Zio and Follow the White Rabbit.
Hi.
Really great panel. And I was curious, on one hand we have storytelling in cinema is all about creating emotion. And it really plays the same role in games, interactive media. I love this idea of real-time, real-time media. And so with that in mind, when you go into VR or AR, how are we accessing emotions in a different way? Or what emotions are uniquely accessible now as storytellers? Because without story, there is no game. Without emotion, there is no game. And without emotion, there is no story. So how can we take design interactions to make games more emotional?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that is a really great question. I think at the moment there's probably too much emphasis put on like cheap thrills, where people go like, oh, it's like jump scares and vertigo, and all of those things are really easy to do.
And fun.
And fun, and certainly, and and as Mark said, there's still a lot of people who do it for the first time. But I think audiences will mature from that, and I think what we find is like a big part of it has to be getting your body into the action. So it's not just something you observe, it's actions and physical motion that sort of underlines the emotional context that you want. I know that's a very vague sort of answer to that, but I think again it almost becomes as much of a design issue as it is a writing issue.
Do you have a 4-second answer to the question?
Well, just because it's so immersive, I think it's easier to go right or go wrong. Like, it's really easy to pull on somebody's heartstrings when they're completely immersed in something. But it's also, just like in the real world, when you do something just slightly wrong that makes somebody feel uncomfortable for whatever reason, it's going to feel uncomfortable in this, fake world just as easily. So it's kind of writing that line that, feels right without feeling cheap.
Well, thanks, guys. We're getting a big blinky wrap-it-up sign, but it was really fun to do this. I'm glad you guys could all make it. Thanks very much.
Thank you.